Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Scott Walker.
Thank you for the introduction. Although these days when I go around the state, I simply say, I'm Scott Walker, I'm from Wauwatosa, I ride a Harley, and I want to be your next governor. It is good to be with you all here today. It is a pleasure. I've been crisscrossing the state. In fact, a little bit earlier at noon, I was over in Port Washington with a group of factory workers at one of our brown bag lunches. Yesterday, we were just outside of Green Bay having a similar lunch with workers there. And in a way, it's very similar to the conversation I've been having with folks all across the state. A lot of times on the weekends, I'm traveling to the far north, northwest, and western parts of the state during the week when I'm still at the courthouse a little bit closer. But whether it's at events like this, whether it's at those brown bag lunches, or a lot on the weekends, I typically go to cafes and other spots to talk to people in the morning at lunch, or morning at breakfast, I should say, or at lunch or other places. I go from table to table and booth to booth. And what I hear, I think, is something similar to what you hear in your own companies, what you hear in your own communities, probably in your own homes. And that is that people are scared. They're scared. They're scared about the economy. They're scared about their jobs. They're scared about whether it's their job or their spouse's job, whether it's their neighbor's job, their kid's job, their employee's job. They're scared about the economy. I'm here to tell you today that come November 2nd of 2010, we don't have to be scared anymore because help is on the way. There's just no doubt about it. And I say that not based on some sort of blind hope like we get out of Washington, but based on the reality that we've come down this path before. So as mentioned in the introduction, I remember literally 8 years ago to the day. I was coming over along I-94 on the way in here to Madison today, and it reminded me of when I served in the State Assembly from Wauwatosa. 8 years ago, I was driving my car in our carpool with about 2 or 3 other lawmakers. One morning, we were coming over in the middle of this pension scandal, so we had the morning radio show on, and about the time we were halfway here, I think about Johnson Creek, I was listening as I was driving and talking to the others, and the guy on the radio said, Scott Walker should run for county executive. Well, after I pulled the car back onto the road, I said to the guys in the carpool, absolutely not. I mean, people were angry. Who wants to be in the middle of a bunch of angry voters? I was upset. My wife was upset. My family was upset. So I set it aside. Well, a little bit later that day, one of the guys in my carpool at an office down the hall from me came in to see me, and he said, you know, I've been thinking about this, Scott. He said, you're on the Sunday morning TV shows, you're in the newspaper, you're doing a lot of things in the state legislature. If you run, people will think you could win. I said, oh my gosh, that's even worse. It wasn't just this multi-million-dollar pension problem. There were structural deficits. There were ethical problems. Heck, the guy who had the job before me raised property taxes 55% during his tenure. Think of all the problems we'd inherit. So I said, no way. And I let it sit. Well, a week went by, and you might remember, many of you followed that, some close by and others throughout the state. Back at the time, the people who wanted to recall the guy who had the job before me were told they needed to collect 73,000 signatures, 73,000 in 60 days. That's unbelievable. I mean, think about that. That's larger than a lot of our communities in Texas. That's larger than West Dallas. I live in Wauwatosa. West Dallas next to me is a pretty big community. 73,000 signatures. Years ago, in less than 30 days, they collected 157,000 signatures. I realized shortly after that I was looking at things all wrong. You see, if it had just been about anger, people would have moved out, they would have given up, they would have thrown in the towel and said enough is enough. But they didn't do that. Not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands of ordinary citizens did an extraordinary thing. They said, we want our government back. And they stood up shoulder to shoulder, neighbor to neighbor, and did something about it. It was at that moment I realized the real emotion on display wasn't anger. It was about hope. Not blind hope, not false hope, but the kind of hope that only happens when you stand up together to take something back. In this case, they said we want our government back on the side of the people again. It was then that I realized they needed a conduit for that change, that real change, that fundamental change that they expected out of their county government. And so I stood up and ran for office, and we were elected. And then 2 years later, we were elected again. And 4 years after that, it was mentioned in the introduction, I was reelected for a third time in a county that went 2/3 for President Obama. We carried 60% of the vote. I am convinced the reason we did that is because as remarkable as it was to win in the first place, it was even more remarkable because we made bold promises and we kept them. Since 2002, we've not only lowered our debt by 10%, but by 2012, my outstanding debt will be 28% lower than when I first took office. The number of employees in the county service, largely through attrition and through contracting out for services, is 23% less today than it was when we first took office. My bond rating, a bond rating that was dropped 3 months before we took office, a bond rating at a time when the state and even places like Dane County, where we're at today, have seen their bond rating dropped, we actually saw ours improved and stabilized. We've done now eight consecutive budgets without raising the property tax levy from the previous year. And last year, when the state had the largest budget deficit ever, we actually had a surplus. Now, it's not just finances and fiscal policy and not just not raising taxes. What we've done there is equally as remarkable. In fact, when I first started running for governor last April, Joe Winnicke from the Madison area ran around the state as the state party chair for the Democrats, complaining that I was ruining things in Milwaukee. In fact, he specified the parks. Well, you notice he doesn't say that anymore. You know why? In October, we won the gold medal for the best park system in the entire country. On top of that, if you look at airports here and all across the country, most airports saw about a 6% drop in passengers in the past year. Not Milwaukee. Mitchell International Airport saw another record-breaking year. We kept pace in 2009 with where we were at in 2008. In fact, in December, we had the largest December ever in our entire history. But probably the most important to me was something we did that years ago, before I took office, Milwaukee County had literally thousands of older adults on waiting lists for long-term care services in our community. Today, because we were the first in the state, one of the first 5 family care projects in the state of Wisconsin, today not one older adult is on a waiting list for long-term care services. We have shown that we could take on the political machine in Milwaukee and win not once, not twice, but 3 times, and do it not only at the ballot box, but in terms of everything we've done and every service we provided. I am convinced if we can take on the machine in Milwaukee and win there, there is no doubt I can take on the machine in our state's capital and win for all of us, the taxpayers here in the state of Wisconsin. That is fundamentally important. Having said that, I want to tell you, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we were traveling the state on this brown bag lunch tour. It's an opportunity not only to hear from employers, but most importantly from workers, from employees about their hopes and concerns and challenges. As I go around on this tour, I've established a pretty simple guide that I have to government. 3 simple principles. I believe that, ultimately something my grandmother taught me, who was raised during the Great Depression, and that is you only spend what you have. Imagine if we thought about that not only in our state's capital, but our nation's capital. I believe that smaller government is better government. And probably most importantly, not just at this crowd, but at brown bag lunches, at just about anywhere else across the state, my 3rd key principle is that people create jobs. People and employers create jobs, not government. That is an important distinction. People create jobs. Today, I want to make a first-of-its-kind campaign announcement that I think is going to be earth-shattering. Today, I announced in front of all of you here today and everybody else who's going to be listening on the news and reading in tomorrow's newspaper that if you elect me as your next governor, I pledge to you here today and to all the other citizens of the state of Wisconsin that by the end of my first term, we will create 250,000 new jobs in this state and 10,000 new businesses by the end of that first term. We the people in this room and other employers across the state, not by the way that Governor Doyle and Mayor Barrett propose, and that is through more government, more spending, more taxes, but rather by getting government out of the way so that you, the employers of this state, can put more people back to work. And here's how we do it. We've got a plan to get there, and it is fundamentally based on getting government out of the way, and I want to list a couple of those categories. Overall, we need to lower the cost of doing business and get government out of the way, and specifically, here's how you do it. First, we need to lower the tax burden. The tax burden on employers. The tax burden on income tax. Because as all of you know, the vast majority of our employers in this state not only pay corporate income tax, they pay individual income tax, particularly on our small and mid-sized employers. We need to lower that tax burden as well. We need to cap off property taxes. And we need to once and for all phase out the state tax on retirement income so our wealth stays in the state of Wisconsin and isn't invested in places like Florida and Arizona and Texas and Tennessee, but is invested in institutions in this state so that it's invested in companies in this state which provide jobs in this state. We need to create a better tax climate in the state of Wisconsin because evidence has shown us that states that have lower tax burdens create more jobs and have better budgets. It is time we have a state again where it is good to do business and you can afford to do business. First and foremost, we need to lower the tax burden. Secondly, we need to lower the regulatory burden in this state. It makes no sense as to why in many of our state and local agencies, why taking out a permit takes 2 days one time, 2 weeks another, and 2 months another time after that. We need a government that understands true customer service, a government that has any regulations and standards based on science and predictability. Third, we need to ease our litigation burden in this state. Now, you all in this room in particular, WMC leading the cause, helped us avoid a major catastrophe. Had Governor Doyle's change in joint and several liability gone through, we'd have to Katie bar the door with the number of jobs that would have left this state. But just playing defense is not enough. We need to aggressively move forward with tort reform changes here in the state to get us out of the way of frivolous and nuisance lawsuits, and we need specific tort reforms so that we can lower our health care costs so that health care providers can practice medicine and not preventative practices just to avoid lawsuits. We need to make sure that in addition to those three things, lowering the tax burden, easing the regulatory burden, moving back in the litigation burden, we move forward on making sure we have a strong education system in this state, a system that is based on preparing the workforce by adding new tools, new technologies, and new accountability standards so that you know what you're getting. It frustrates me to no end when I tour plants and hear about the frustrations they have of just having basic skills coming into the workforce when they have people apply for positions in their plants or factories or businesses. We need to have greater accountability, greater tools for the next generation. And on top of that, beyond just our K through 12 system, we need to make sure that we empower the University of Wisconsin system to act more like a business, so that they can pursue economic development in the truest sense of the way and not be bogged down by the excessive regulations of state government. Next up, we need to make sure, as you were just hearing from this panel, that we make health care affordable in this state. Our challenge in Wisconsin is not access to health care, it is the affordability to our employers, big and small and everywhere in between, and that means a health care system that is driven on reforms that are market-driven strategies and not government mandates. That means eliminating the state tax on the health savings account. That means moving forward with disclosure, or some may call it transparency, so that you all, when you're making purchasing decisions, know the true cost of health care procedures at all health care providers in the state of Wisconsin. It means moving forward with the option to buy into larger purchasing pools so that you can share the risk amongst your employees so that you can offer the kind of health care that you want to in this state. And probably most importantly, that means ensuring that we move forward with ways that incentivize a greater participation in our health, not just our health care, so that all of us as individuals are more actively involved in making better health decisions so that we can lower our health care costs, not only as companies, but as part of the overall state. And finally, in terms of overall strategies, I believe we have to have a strong and aggressive infrastructure system. That means both reliable sources of power to fuel the future of the state's economy and making sure we have a reliable and upgraded transportation system so we can get products from one part of the state to the other. When we're able, not yet, but when we're able to do that, if you give me the honor of serving as your next governor, I want to affirm to you again today the pledge I am making very specifically. When we're able to do that, when we're able to ease the cost of doing business in this state, when we're able to get government out of the way of doing business in this state, I am convinced, and I pledge to you here today, at a minimum, we will create 250,000 new jobs by the end of my first term, and as part of doing that, we will create 10,000 or more new businesses here in the state of Wisconsin. That's not just talk about jobs, that's specifics about how to get the job done. Now, I know that we can do this. I just fundamentally know that we can do this. I got to tell you, I have traveled the state from one end to the other, and I know that we can do it. In fact, I got into this race last April based on a simple set of principles. I believe in economic opportunity and prosperity for everyone here in the state of Wisconsin, no matter where you're from, no matter what your background, no matter what part of the state you come from. I believe in economic opportunity and prosperity based on limited government, lower taxes, fiscal responsibility, and increasingly these days, a restoration of our personal rights and liberties, because Lord knows they're under attack here in our state's capital. Even more so, they're under attack in our nation's capital. We need leaders who are going to stand up and demand that those rights and liberties be given back to the people of this state and the people of this country. We need leaders who side with the people and not with the government. Now, I got to tell you, those are simple principles. Simple, but not often easy. There have been countless times on the other end of I-94, near our Great Lake, Michigan, where being in the courthouse in Milwaukee County, where it would have been easier to set aside those simple principles for a more politically expedient solution, to get along with the liberals on my county board, to get along with the liberals on my editorial board. But I didn't do that, because you see, 8 years ago, I made a simple pledge to taxpayers in my county. I told them at that time, as I tell you here today, that I would treat their money, the taxpayers' money, as if it were my own. I have kept that pledge over and over and over again, and if God willing you give me the honor of serving as your next governor, I will spend every hour of every day until we get this state working again, lowering your money as if it were my own, to get this state back to work again. I believe in Wisconsin. Let me say that again. I believe in Wisconsin. I have traveled the state from one end to the other. I've been to Superior 4 times since the start of the year. I've been to Door County, where my great-grandmother lived to be 101. I've been down to Delavan and Walworth County, where I grew up. I've been from Wausau to La Crosse, from Kenosha up to Sheboygan, and everywhere in between. And I know this is a great state. I believe in Wisconsin. We've got great people in this state. We've got the workforce that is bar none the best in the world. You know what, they work for you. We've got people who embody the Midwestern work ethic, the kind of people who put in a hard day's work and they do it all week long, the kind of people you not only build a company around, but a community around and ultimately a state around. I believe in our employers in this state that are many times 2 or 3 or 4 generations deep of family-owned businesses. And even if they aren't, you treat your employees like their family. And no matter what others may tell you in other parts of this country, you're vested here. You want to be here. You're not going to move out of here. You're begging your government to give you a reason to stay and add jobs in Wisconsin. You just want government to get out of the way. We've got a state filled with great workers and great employers and tremendous natural resources. Think about it. No other state is surrounded by 2 Great Lakes and the greatest river in the country. We're filled with 15,000 inland lakes. That's 5,000 more than Minnesota. Eat your heart out, Brett Favre. No other place in this country, no other place in the world is better than Wisconsin. To grow up in, to live in, to play in, to work in, to start a family in, to build a business in, someday, yes, to retire in. No place in the world is better than Wisconsin. Having traveled this state, what I want to tell you firmly here today is what is failing us is not our people or our places. What is failing us is our government. And the good news I proclaim to you here this afternoon is that come November 2nd of 2010, we the people of Wisconsin can take that government back. We the people can put government firmly back on the side of the people again. We the people can get this state working again. We the people can make this a Wisconsin we can believe in again. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for being here. Let's get to work.
Thank you so much, Scott. Scott will be visiting with reporters and answering questions. Please feel free to come and listen if you wish. I want to thank you on behalf of the WMC for attending Business Day in Madison this year. We hope you enjoyed the program. Let's give the WMC staff a hearty round of applause. Thank you all again. Have safe travels home.
a passion to catch. It's sort of interesting.
You got to get a taste.
Yeah.
Then you got to go back and knock on doors.
I'll be doing that.
Yep, come on. I got my shirt and my patch and everything. In fact, I was just up in Manitowoc the other day, and I saw the guys from Manitowoc Crane stops. Yeah, that was a fun one. Ishmael, Michigan. Well, you got to bring your helmets. I wear a helmet anyway. So
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
'cause we go in, every year we go in our ride. We go into the UP and they're helmets.
Good to see you. First of all, this is the major topic that is on everybody's minds right now. I mean, jobs. So tell us about what you're going to say here today.
Well, today we're going to lay out a very specific plan about how we're going to create through the private sector 250,000 jobs by the end of our first term, 10,000 new businesses. We think that's very achievable if we get government out of the way. That's probably the biggest difference between Governor Doyle and Mayor Barrett. We believe very much in more government programs, more spending, more taxation, and our plan, which is based on getting government out of the way. I believe people and employers create jobs, not the government, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're laying that plan out to these employers, just like earlier today I sat down at another brown bag lunch talking to workers and another one of our stops across the state, talking to them as well, and that's the same issue. Very concerned about jobs, very concerned about economy, and the people we talk to there, much like those we talked to here today, I believe that the best answer is to get government out of the way.
And Mayor Barrett pulled out some of his accomplishments to demonstrate. So are you going to be doing the same?
No, in our case, all those are things he mentioned are things part of the same groups I'm a part of, the M7 and others out there, so they're not because of any one elected official or any one political entity. Those are things that really the private sector in the greater Milwaukee area are at the forefront of. In our case, what we're going to talk about is getting state government out of the way so that you have across the board, from one end of the state to the other, the ability for the private sector, for the people of the state to create more jobs, not just the government to create jobs.
Is the message always the same, even with these business leaders here today and people at home? Same message?
Exact same message as I talked to. I had about 50 guys who work on the front lines at a factory in Port Washington today. I had another group I talked to at a factory just outside of Green Bay yesterday. It's the same message to them as I talk to the CEOs of businesses big and small here today. It's not just about jobs. You can talk all you want about jobs. You can talk about it over and over. Talk is cheap. You got to have action. In this case, action based on more government. We've seen the last year nationally doesn't work. That government's not the great way to create jobs, but rather getting government out of the way is what we're going to be talking about. We talk about it in our ag tour. We're going to talk about it today with the statewide chamber. We're going to keep talking about it until the campaign's done.
And the mayor said something interesting on the podium about borrowing money to balance the budget. He said that the city didn't do it, but the county did.
He's just wrong. Avian and his comptroller of the city of Milwaukee point out that's not right. We've actually cut our debt. In fact, by 2012, our debt will be down 28%. You look at the overall status of our budgets. Well, the mayor's, every budget he's had in office, he's raised the property tax levy. We have yet to raise the property tax levy in our proposals. Last year, yet again, we had a balanced budget. So he's trying to confuse the voters, I guess, but in the end, the facts are very clear that what he's stating is not accurate. And what we've done is a proven track record, which is why voters, even in the Democrat area, have reelected him twice.
All right. Well, Mr. Connie,
you have to see if we're going to run this.
We do.
Thank
you so much.
Good to see you too.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. I'm Jill, by the way. Hi, Jill.
It's a nice little Morales recorder, and it's got a nice little.
I was going to ask for
and they're just like,
I have one of those in here too.
Big thing we had there from 1976. Oh, hello. It worked for you. I brought it for you.
Oh, I'm like going, where'd
you come from?
I want me to stand.
do you need to put? Nope. Okay, great.
Well, go ahead and open it up to questions. Who wants to go first?
Mr. Secretary, how are you?
This guy's ready, I can tell.
Where? Oh, that's him. Thanks.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Everybody's talking about jobs. Barrett is talking about jobs. You're talking about jobs. So what makes you think that you are up for the task more so than he would be or than Newman would be?
Yeah, well, I think the fundamental difference between what Mayor Barrett and I talked about, what he's talked about up until now and even today is more about the government driving jobs. I believe that people and employers create jobs. jobs. And so the strategy we outlined today is similar to the one I've been talking to workers about earlier today and yesterday near Green Bay, and that's about getting government out of the way, lowering the tax burden, lowering the litigation burden, lowering the regulatory burden, doing the things that get government out of the way so that employers in the state can put more people back to work. I think that's the fundamental difference. We've seen the last year nationally that relying on the government is a failed policy, and unfortunately that's what we get more out of with the policies of Governor Doyle and Mayor Barrett. What we're talking about is a bold, aggressive, positive agenda to put 250,000 more people back to work by the end of my first term and 10,000 more businesses being created by the end of our first term. We think we've got an aggressive 6-point plan to do that, and if given the chance of serving as governor, we'd make it happen.
Scott, the Department of Revenue estimates, as you're aware, say some of those jobs are going to come back anyway. So how many more jobs are you going to create beyond the DOR estimates, which predict some type of recovery in 2011?
Yeah, we think, 11, 12, 13, all the way up to 14. For us, we think this is a minimum goal. We'd like to go even beyond this, depending on how aggressively we can get this agenda through the legislature if I'm serving as the governor. The bottom line is, though, I think where we go beyond the normal estimates is where, in the end, once you get government out of the way, the states that have been successful, the states that have surpluses, the states that are not dealing with budget crises like Wisconsin, the states where they've seen job growth, are the states where the cost of doing business is less. If we do that here in Wisconsin, we're going to put more people to work, and 250,000 more jobs is just a starting point. We'd like to see many more than that. But we're the only candidate who's telling people exactly what we're going to do at a minimum, and we'd like to add even more to that.
When are you going to benchmark these numbers? In January 1 of the next year? I mean, we've got to have some baseline numbers on which to judge this promise by.
Well, and what we're going to do is not only with that, but between now and November 2nd, obviously we're not going to put everything out at once, but we're going to be specifying in each of those 6 points the particulars in terms of tax cuts, what we mean in terms of regulatory reform, what we mean in terms of litigation reform. But we thought it was important today with a wide group of employers of all sizes, big, small, and everywhere in between, and in a week when we're starting our brown bag tours out, where we're talking to workers, not just CEOs, and that we lay out what our goals are, what our objectives are, what our overriding concepts are about how to do that. And then as we have this conversation throughout the campaign, we will continue to lay out more details.
So you're going to have more details on your proposal to freeze property taxes, because there's so many nuances of that.
Yep, exactly. On that, on taxes on employers, on taxes on income, on phasing out retirement income, those will all be specifying how we plan on doing that in our first term.
There's a bill floating around the legislature right now called the Clean Energy Job Act, and Mayor Barrett had something to say about this morning. What concerns do you have about it in terms of your desire to cut regulations and the kinds of regulations that it might bring on?
I think the Global Warming Task Force legislation is the wrong approach. A number of reports have showed it would cost us as many 43,000 jobs in the state. We can't afford that any time, let alone now. It's an interesting twist by Mayor Barrett, because in December he said no matter whether it passed now or not, he was going to make that a priority of his administration as governor. He has tiptoed around that, presumably after taking a poll, finding out the majority of people in the state share my concern that it will cost us jobs. And I think what you're seeing is window dressing. In the end, he hasn't said he's against the fundamental flaws in this legislation. He just said he'd like to see it modified. I think people need to nail him down as to what that means.
What are the major flaws in your view?
Well, the mandates that ultimately are going to cost employers more. We've got paper mills in this state that are going out of business. We've got manufacturers that have tremendous problems when it comes to fuel and electrical costs. We've got auto manufacturers that we'd like to see come back in Janesville and in Kenosha. All those things take major blows under this Global Warming Task Force legislation. One of the few areas we can agree on is they need to lift the lid on nuclear energy. For several generations now, the men and women who've served our United States Navy have operated on vessels that operate through nuclear generators. At a minimum, we should be doing that here in the state of Wisconsin. But as far as most of the rest of it, the mandates that are going to cost us jobs. And essentially, the mayor said he wants it modified, but the changes really don't modify it in terms of job loss. And it's another example of how, in the end, if you elect Tom Barrett as governor, you're going to see 4 more years and really a third term of Jim Doyle's policies.
The Joint Finance Committee voted to take $810 million last week to start high-speed rail service. If you're elected, would you order work on that line stopped?
Well, I think the first thing is whether you like Rio or not, the bottom line is we should all be better stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. I've asked 2 weeks ago the current leadership, the current governor, and the current members of the legislature to answer 3 simple questions. Can you guarantee that $800 million roughly is the true cost? Because everywhere else in the world, the costs have been much higher. We see it right here in the United States in the Orlando to Tampa line. Secondly, who's going to pay for the operating cost? It's anywhere from $7.5 million to $10 million additional operating costs that no one's identified where that's coming from, and I don't see any appetite for a tax increase. And third, if at least part of that's going to come from the State Transportation Fund, what projects are going to suffer? What roads are going to be deferred? What bridges aren't going to be built? What transit systems are going to get less funding? Here, Kenosha, Racine, or Eau Claire, or anywhere else, because none of those questions have been answered. And at a minimum, we owe it to the taxpayers here in the state of Wisconsin that before any additional line like this is built, we need to have answers to those questions.
If you can't get those questions answered, are you going to slow work on that line?
I would, as governor on any project, I would make sure we could answer fundamental questions like that before acting on anything, yes.
Some of the mayors, just to follow up on what you were saying, some of the mayors, Oconomowoc and the Watertown.
Brookfield, Watertown are the 3 stops.
The stops over there. They were. I asked them a question, and they said that it's sort of the cost of doing business. 50-some years ago, when the interstate went through, people asked the same question. Well, the cost of maintaining, plowing the roads, all of that, and they say it's the same thing.
It's not. I mean, the roads actually are paid for by user fees. 96% of the costs generated by the State Transportation Fund come from 2 sources, the gas tax and the vehicle registration fee. In other words, the people who use roads and highways in the state pay for them. They're now being asked to subsidize something beyond that, and my answer, or my response is simple. When we have bridges posted at the Zoo interchange in Milwaukee, when we have major transportation projects across the state that are short of funding, and when we have transit systems in all parts of the state that don't have adequate funding, can we afford to take money away from those at the expense of a new line? And I think until you can answer where the funding is going to come from that, we shouldn't be moving on to anything yet.
Last question?
One question. So your main points for your plan to create 250,000 new jobs is really based on deregulation. So how can you make a promise, like a solid promise, on something that's basically by definition out of your control?
Well, state agencies are directly under control of the governor. There are statutory areas that are involved that the legislature has to be involved in. But it's one of the benefits of being the only candidate who's been a chief executive who actually taken action to reduce the size of the workforce, reduce the regulatory burden. It's in direct contrast to the mayor, who's actually added to the size and scope of government, increased property taxes under his tenure. We've gone down the opposite track, and you can have fundamental impact on a variety of different state agencies. And for those that take statutory change, that's part of the benefit of being governor. You've got the bully pulpit and the ability to take that directly to the people to get the legislature to act on it. And as governor, just as Tommy Thompson did 25 years ago approximately, he got the state working again by taking it directly to the people. And that moved, even at that time, a Democrat-controlled legislature.
Great. Thank you very much.